The Victorian Era. It conjures images of invention, empire, and very rigid morality. A time of gaslit streets and horse-drawn carriages, where society put on a face of perfect, polished respectability. This was a world of progress, of elegant fashion, grand architecture, and even grander ideas about civilization. London was the heart of the biggest empire the world had ever seen, a city basically celebrating its own triumph. But under all that polish, a new kind of monster was stirring. While the rich danced in lavish ballrooms, predators walked the foggy alleys, and they used the very system meant to create order as their hunting ground. In the shadow of all that industrial might, a darkness was growing, a modern kind of evil that society just wasn't ready for. These weren't just criminals, they were legends in the making, whose brutal act would stain the gilded image of the age forever. This is the story of 7 killers who didn't just commit murder, they turned Victorian society upside down. Our story begins in the autumn of 1888, in the desperate, crowded streets of London's East End. Here, in the district of Whitechapel, a killer emerged who would become the very symbol of Victorian horror. He was never caught, never identified, and the world came to know him by a name taken from a letter that taunted police and terrified the public: Jack the Ripper. The Ripper's reign of terror was short, but it was unbelievably brutal. His victims were impoverished women, many forced into sex work by the harsh realities of Victorian city life. The canonical 5, Mary Ann Nicholas, Anne Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were all murdered between August and November of that year. Their stories are a grim look at how vulnerable women were in an era that offered them little protection and even less dignity. Mary Ann Nicholas was a mother of 5. After her marriage fell apart, ended up destitute. Anne Chapman was a soldier's daughter, also a mother, who fell into poverty. Each woman had a life, a story, before it was violently snuffed out. But it was the Ripper's methods that truly shocked the world. His attacks were a gruesome ritual, a slit throat, followed by horrific abdominal mutilations. He showed a terrifying amount of anatomical knowledge, removing organs from several victims with a chilling precision that made many think he had to be a doctor or a butcher. And the attacks got more and more savage. The final, canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was the only one murdered indoors, in her own small room. There, the killer had time to perform the most nightmarish mutilation of all, leaving behind a scene so ghastly that even hardened police officers were shaken to their core. The investigation was the biggest the city had ever seen. Thousands were interviewed and slums were searched, but the killer stayed a phantom. He was a ghost in the fog, a local who knew Chapel's maze of streets better than the police did. The press, in a total frenzy, published sensational stories that spread panic across the city and the world. Letters claiming to be from the killer only fueled the hysteria. The most famous was the From Hell letter, which arrived with a small box containing half a human kidney. The sender claimed he had fried and eaten the other half, and that the organ was taken from Catherine Eddowes. Jack the Ripper was more than a murderer. He was a phenomenon. He exposed the brutal reality of life in the slums, a world the rest of London preferred to ignore. He revealed just how primitive policing and forensic science were, and in his terrifying anonymity, he became the living embodiment of darkness that lay just beneath the veneer of Victorian civilization. He was never brought to justice, and by escaping, he created a legend that still haunts us today. While Jack the Ripper was stalking the streets, another, far more prolific killer was operating in plain sight, preying on the most vulnerable people of all. Her name was Amelia Dyer, but she was known as the Ogress of Reading. To the desperate unmarried mothers of Victorian England, she looked like an angel of mercy. In reality, she was a monster. Dyer was a baby farmer. In an era where a new law basically let fathers off the hook for financially supporting illegitimate children, many women were left in an impossible position. Baby farmers offered a way out, taking in unwanted infants for a one-time fee. Dyer advertised herself as a respectable, married woman who would give these children a loving home. Mothers desperate to give their babies a chance and avoid social ruin would hand over their child and a fee, believing they'd done the right thing. But Dyer's home wasn't a sanctuary. At first, she'd let the infants die from neglect and starvation, sometimes using an opium-laced syrup called Mother's Friend to quiet their crying as they faded away. This method, though was slow and inconvenient, she soon found a faster way: murder, often on the very same day she got a child. Dyer would strangle the infant with white dressmaking tape. She'd then wrap the tiny bodies in paper and dump them in the River Thames. For nearly 30 years, Dyer got away with it, moving from town to town, using different names whenever suspicion arose. She was even convicted of neglect once and sentenced to 6 months of hard labour, but that lenient sentence did little to stop her. It's estimated she may have murdered between 200 and 400 infants, making her one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Her downfall came in March 1896, when a bargeman pulled a small package from the Thames. Inside was the body of a baby girl, Helena Fry. Crucially, the paper it was wrapped in had a name and address that was still readable. Set a trap, sending a young woman as a decoy to answer one of Dyer's ads. When Dyer opened her door, she was met by detectives. A search of her home revealed a horrifying smell, piles of baby clothes, and the white tape she used for strangling. When police dredged the river, they found more bodies. Dyer later told them, "You'll know all mine by the tape around their necks." Amelia Dyer's case became a national scandal. It exposed the dark, unregulated business of baby farming and the desperate situation of unwed mothers. She turned the maternal instincts into a cold, commercial enterprise of death, shattering society's trust and forcing a grim reckoning with its own rigid moral codes. Long before Jack the Ripper gave a name to Victorian terror, a woman in the north of England was perfecting a quiet, sneaky method of murder. Her name was Mary Ann Cotton, and she's often called Britain's first female serial killer. While men like Ripper used brutal force, Cotton's weapon was invisible, served up in a cup of tea or a bowl of stew, arsenic. Born in 1832, Mary Ann moved all over northern England, leaving a trail of dead husbands, children, and stepchildren behind. Over 2 decades, it's believed she poisoned as many as 21 people, including 3 of her 4 husbands and 11 of her own 13 children. Her motive was brutally simple: money. Life insurance policies were becoming more common, and Mary Ann saw her chance. She would marry a man, often a widower, with kids, talk him into taking out a life insurance policy on himself and his family, and then get to work. The victims would suffer from agonizing stomach pains, fever, and violent sickness before they died. The symptoms looked almost identical to gastric fever, dysentery, which were common and deadly diseases back then. This allowed Mary Ann to escape suspicion for years. Doctors signed the death certificate, and Mary Ann collected the insurance payout. Then she'd move on, looking for her next husband, her next victim. After her first husband, William Mowbray, died of a supposed intestinal disorder, she collected £35. Several of their children also died young. Her next husband, George Ward, also died of gastric problems, leaving her with another insurance payment. But her greed finally caught up with her. After marrying her fourth husband, Frederick Cotton, he had several of his sons soon die. Mary Ann then took a lover, Joseph Nattrath, who also died after changing his will in her favour. The final victim was her 7-year-old stepson, Charles Edward Cotton. When a local official asked her to help nurse a sick woman, she complained that Charles was in the way, saying, "I won't be troubled long. He'll go like all the rest of the Cottons." Days later, the boy was dead. The official, now deeply suspicious, convinced a doctor to hold off on the death certificate and called the police. An investigation into Charles' death found traces of arsenic. Soon, newspapers picked up the story, digging up Mary Ann's shocking history of dead husbands and children, all lost to stomach fevers. Her trial was a sensation. Mary Ann Cotton was convicted of murder and hanged in 1873. Her case showed just how easily a killer could operate behind the mask of a grieving wife and mother, using a poison you could buy in any shop for a few pennies. Some killers were driven by rage, others by greed. Dr. Thomas Neal Cream was driven by a twisted God complex and a hunger for fame. Known as the Lambeth Poisoner, this Scottish-Canadian doctor used his medical knowledge not to heal but to kill, turning medicine into a weapon and terrorizing the streets of the early 1890s. Cream was an unlikely monster, cross-eyed and looking respectable. He operated across 3 countries, leaving a trail of bodies in Canada, the United States, and finally in England. His career in murder started with botched abortions. He soon graduated to poisoning. His favourite tool was strychnine, a poison that caused horrific convulsions, muscle spasms, and an agonizing death where the victim stays fully conscious. After serving prison time in Illinois for one murder, Cream was released in 1891 and with money from his late father sailed to London. He moved into a place in Lambeth and began to stalk the city's sex workers. In October 1891, he met 19-year-old Ellen Donworth. He offered her a drink from a bottle. She died later that night in agony from strychnine poisoning. He went on to poison at least 3 more women: Matilda Clover, Emma Shrivel, and Alice Marsh. But here's where Dr. Cream's story gets truly bizarre. He couldn't resist inserting himself into the investigation of his own crimes. After murdering his victims, he'd write anonymous letters to the police and prominent citizens, accusing innocent people and demanding money to reveal the real killer. He even wrote a letter accusing his landlord of murdering Matilda Clover. The problem was, Clover's death had been officially recorded as natural causes from alcoholism, but trying to frame someone for the death no one knew was a murder, Cream basically pointed the finger right at himself. His arrogance was his downfall. He bragged about how much he knew about the Lambeth poisoner case to anyone who would listen, including a visiting American police officer who found his detailed knowledge of the crimes is extremely suspicious. Scotland Yard put him under surveillance. He soon connected the dots between his habit of visiting sex workers and the mysterious poisonings. At his trial in 1892, the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. On the gallows, just as the trapdoor opened, he reportedly yelled, "I am Jack the..." His sentence was cut short, leaving the world to wonder if he was about to confess to being Jack the Ripper. It's impossible since he was in prison in America during the Rippers murders. But it was a final, fitting act of ego from a killer who craved infamy above all else. In the quiet town of Rugeley, Staffordshire, lived a man who was the very picture of a two-faced Victorian gentleman. Dr. William Palmer was a respected physician, a family man, and a pillar of the community. But behind that facade was a gambling addict, a fraudster, and a cold-blooded poisoner who Charles Dickens himself called the greatest villain that ever stood in the Old Bailey. Palmer's life was a downward spiral of debt and lies. He was addicted to horse racing and always needed money. And he found a terrifying way to get it. People around him just started dying at very convenient times. 4 of his own infant children died of convulsions before their first birthdays. His mother-in-law died, his wife, Anne, died after he took out a big life insurance policy on her. Then his brother, Walter, also insured, died. Each death brought Palmer a pile of cash, which he promptly lost at the racetrack. The cause of death was always listed as something common, cholera, apoplexy, but the real cause was poison. His final crime was his most reckless. In 1855, Palmer's friend and gambling buddy John Cook won a lot of money at the races. That evening, while celebrating with Palmer, Cook complained his drink tasted funny and he became violently ill. Despite suspecting Palmer had dosed him, Cook, for some reason, went back to Rugeley with Palmer and stayed at an inn where Palmer took over his care. Over the next few days, Palmer nursed his friend. He intercepted medicine from another doctor and gave Cook his own pills instead. He bought strychnine from a local chemist. On the night of November 21st, after Palmer gave him 2 pills, John Cook died in terrible agony, screaming and convulsing so violently his body arched backwards. Palmer immediately tried to cover his tracks. He got a death certificate that said apoplexy. He tried to bribe the coroner and even stole the stomach contents from the autopsy to stop them from being tested. But Cook's stepfather was suspicious and demanded an inquest. Even though the forensics of the day struggled to find definite proof of strychnine, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified that Palmer brought the poison and described Cook's horrific convulsive death, a textbook case of strychnine poisoning. The trial was a media circus. It tapped into a growing public fear of scientific murder, the use of modern poisons by educated men like doctors. Palmer was found guilty and publicly hanged in 1856. As he stepped onto the gallows, he reportedly looked at the trapdoor and asked, "Are you sure it's safe?" His story became a chilling Victorian morality tale, a warning that the most respectable men could be the most depraved monsters. Not all Victorian killers were stealthy poisoners or shadow figures. Some, like Charles Peace, were brazen, violent, and famous in their own lifetimes. Part burglar, part murderer, and part master of disguise. Peace was a career criminal whose wild exploits both captivated and terrified the nation, making him a household name long before he was executed. Born in Sheffield in 1832, an industrial accident left him with a permanent limp, but this didn't slow down his criminal career one bit. He became a notorious cat burglar, known for his agility in breaking into the homes of the wealthy. He was also a musician and sometimes carried his burglary tools in a violin case, adding to his mystique. But underneath the cunning burglar was a man with a violent temper. Peace's life of crime escalated to murder in 1876 while robbing a house near Manchester. He was confronted by a police officer, Constable Nicholas Cox. Peace shot and killed him but escaped, leaving another man, William Habron, to be wrongly convicted for the crime. Free and unpunished, Peace returned to Sheffield, where he developed an obsession with his neighbour's wife, Catherine Dyson. He stalked and harassed her relentlessly. When her husband Arthur confronted him, Peace shot him dead in his own driveway and fled. Now a wanted murderer, Peace went on the run. He created a whole new identity in London, living in the respectable suburbs of Peckham as Mr. Thompson, complete with a family, and kept up his burglary spree across the city. His ability to live a double life, playing a gentle citizen by day while preying on the city by night, was remarkable. His luck finally ran out in October 1878 while trying to burgle a house in Blackheath. He was caught by police. He fired his revolver, wounding an officer, but was finally captured. It was only then that his real identity as a notorious murderer, Charles Peace, was revealed. His trial was one of the biggest cases of the era. The public was fascinated by this master criminal who had dodged justice for so long. While waiting for his execution, Peace gave a full confession to the murder of Constable Cox, which cleared the name of the innocent William Habron, who was then pardoned and compensated. It was maybe his only decent act. Charles Peace was hanged in 1879. He represented a different kind of Victorian fear, not the hidden poisoner, but the bold, violent criminal who could be living right next door, hiding a monstrous nature behind a mask of respectability. The relationship between master and servant was a cornerstone of Victorian life, built on strict class rules. In 1879, that foundation was shattered by a crime so gruesome it became known as the Barnes Mystery. The killer was Kate Webster, domestic servant, and her victim was her employer, Julia Martha Thomas. Webster, an Irish woman with a history of theft, was hired by the wealthy and eccentric widow, Julia Thomas. The relationship was rocky from the start. Webster's work wasn't good enough, and Thomas was a demanding boss. After just over a month, Thomas fired Webster. On the day she was dismissed, after Thomas came back from church, an argument exploded. According to Webster's confession, she threw the elderly woman down a flight of stairs. Then, in a panic, she choked her to death. But the horror was just beginning. To get rid of the body, Webster dismembered it with a razor and a meat saw. She then boiled the body parts in a large copper pot. She packaged the remains, throwing some into the River Thames, including a box with the torso. She got rid of the head separately, and it wouldn't be found for over 130 years. In 2010, a skull was dug up in a garden that once belonged to her, now owned by naturalist David Attenborough, and it was later confirmed to be that of Julia Martha Thomas. Then, in an act of stunning nerve, Webster simply took over her victim's identity. She wore Thomas's clothes, slept in her bed, and started selling her furniture, telling people she'd inherited the house. Her little charade didn't last long. A box containing human remains was found in the river, and suspicion quickly fell on the missing woman's maid. Webster fled to her home in Ireland, but was soon arrested and brought back to London for trial. The trial was a sensation. Webster tried to blame several men, including a friend who had unknowingly helped her carry the box of remains, but her lies fell apart. The case horrified Victorian society, not just because it was brutal, but because it was a terrifying flip of social order. A servant hadn't just murdered her master, she had tried to steal her entire life. Kate Webster was found guilty and hanged, leaving behind the memory of a crime struck at the very heart of the Victorian class system. These 7 individuals were more than just murderers. They were ghosts haunting an age of supposed progress. They exposed the rot hiding beneath the polished floorboards of Victorian society, the poverty, the inequality, and the primitive state of justice that let them thrive. Their stories forced a nation to look into the darkness it tried so hard to deny. If you are fascinated by this journey into the shadows of history, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales from the dark side, and let us know in the comments which of these killers you find the most chilling. From the foggy alleys of Whitechapel to the respectable parlours of suburbia, these killers proved that the monsters of the Victorian era weren't just in books, they were real. They were doctors, nurses, labourers and servants. They walked among everyone else, hiding behind masks of normalcy until their violent urges erupted. In doing so, they didn't just take lives, they shattered the illusion of a safe and orderly world, leaving a legacy of fear that will forever change how we think about crime, society, and the darkness that can lurk in the human heart.